The Penderwicks, A Summer Tale of Four Sisters, Two Rabbits, and a Very Interesting Boy, by Jeanne Birdsall. Chapter 14, A Midnight Adventure. One more story, said Batty. You've already had 3, said Rosalind. You know there was one story at bedtime. Please, Rosalind, Hound is lonely and sad tonight. Hound dropped the bone he had been chewing, galloped across the room, and looked joyously onto Batty's bed. Yes, he looks lonely and sad, said Rosalind, pushing Hound off the bed and wondering for the 15th time what had happened to Skye and Batty at Arundel Hall that morning. Skye had locked herself in her room the moment she got back to the cottage. Batty's eyes had been red and swollen, and she had insisted on sticking close to Rosalind for the rest of the day. Neither would say what was wrong. Tell me a story about Mommy and Uncle Gordon when they were little, said Batty. All right, one more story if you promise to go to sleep afterward. I promise. Do you want peanut butter on the walls or the bobsled? Both, Batty, said Rosalind warningly. The bobsled. Rosalind began. When Uncle Gordon was 7 years old and Mommy was 5, Uncle Gordon read a book about bobsledding and decided he wanted to learn how. But it was summer, and there was no snow. So Uncle Gordon took the mattress off his bed and dragged it to the top of the stairs so he would slide it down like a bobsled. But he wasn't sure how well it would work, so he told Mommy to take the first ride. Mommy said no, said Batty sleepily. Her eyes were starting to close. Until Uncle Gordon said he'd pay her 25 cents to do it. So Mommy got under the covers. Uncle Gordon had left the sheets and blankets on the mattress to make it more like a bobsled, and Uncle Gordon gave the whole thing a giant push. Rosalind paused a minute, and when Batty didn't chime in, went on in a whisper. But it wasn't a straight pace. After 12 steps, it came to a landing where it curved around, then went down another 12 steps. So, of course, when the mattress got to the landing, it got stuck and folded up like an accordion, and Mommy was all tangled up in blankets and sheets, mattress, and she started to yell, Batty? Batty had finally fallen asleep. Rosalind tucked her in securely, kissed her cheek, and gave Hound a stern stay off the bed. Look, gave her back a big, red, doggy grin full of innocence and the promise to never even think about jumping on Batty's bed ever again. Rosalind turned off the light, closed the door behind her, and heard a great thump. She sighed and headed for the steps to the attic. Now it was time to go upstairs to check on Jeanne, who had stayed in bed all day with her cold, napping, then writing, then reading, then napping again. Jane's light was on, and the book she had been reading, Magic by the Lake, was lying open on the bed covers. But Jane was fast asleep, her uncombed curls scattered across the pillow. Rosalind moved the book to the bedside table, then brushed her fingers against Jane's forehead. It was cooler. The fever had dropped. Daddy would be relieved. Jane stirred and muttered. Now that you are free, Arthur, whither shall I convey you in my balloon? Choose your heart's desire. Where shall it be? Russia? Australia? Brasilia? Jane, it's Rosalind. Do you need anything? And the boy replied, Anywhere in the world where Miss Horriferous can't find me. Shh, go back to sleep. Rosalind turned off the light, then slipped downstairs and into her own room. Only 3 more nights, she thought, and home to Cameron. Did she miss this room? It wasn't as pretty as her room at home, with its cherry furniture and the colorful plaid curtains and bedspread her mother had made. But still, she had been happy here. There was Haggard's book about Gettysburg on the bed. She was almost finished with it. And a white rose from Miss Vimbiata bush on the bureau. And all the letters she had gotten so far from Anna, filled with advice about Academy, and hanging on the outside of the closet door, where Rosalind could look at it every day, the striped dress she'd worn to Geoffrey's birthday party. Rosalind walked over, touched the covered buttons on the back, one at a time, 13 of them. She knew that by heart, just like she knew by heart what Cadney said when he saw her in it. Rosalind wandered over to the window and looked out. The rain had stopped, and the sky had cleared. The moon was riding high above the treetops. Rosalind pushed up the screen and leaned out the window. Calculated that by pitching herself at a certain angle and twisting a little to the left, she was pointing directly at Cagney's apartment, would even have been able to see its lights if those trees in the hedge hadn't been in the way. Wow, you are great. That's what he'd said. Once in a while, she allowed herself to pretend he had been talking only to her. Well, Rosalind, you look... She jumped, hitting her head on the bottom of the screen. Somebody was knocking on her bedroom door. Rosalind, are you in there? It was Skye. Rosalind quietly pushed the screen into place and opened the door. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Why does something have to be wrong? Said Sky. She came in and sat down on the bed. Fine, nothing's wrong. You always lock yourself in your bedroom for hours and act like a grumpy bear at supper. Was it that bad? Yes. Rosamond sat down, too, and waited. It was usually easier to let Sky go at her own speed. She took a while. First, she looked all around the room, swinging her legs, and then she stared at the ceiling for a few minutes. Finally, she said, Do you ever lose your temper? I yelled at you about those cookies you burnt when we first got here. No, I mean really, really lose it and go kind of nuts. When Tommy Gager dumped my book report in a mud puddle on purpose, I called him terrible names and everything. That was years ago, like 3rd or 4th grade. Well, that's the last time I can remember. Sky went back to looking at the ceiling. Rosamond's patience was getting low. If she didn't push Sky a little, they could be sitting here all night. Did you lose your temper today? Yes, how did you know? I lost my temper at Mrs. Tifton. I said things. Sky stopped. But the things she said first. Terrible things. I couldn't help it. Wilson was sure that she should recommend Sky. Penderwicks didn't lose their tempers at adults, especially after they'd promised to behave well to those very same adults. But the idea of Mrs. Tipton saying terrible things sent a chill down her back. She had to ask. What terrible things? About Mommy. It was like a slap in the face. Wilson gasped and glanced over at the photograph of her mother on her bedside table. Her beloved mother, worlds and universes better than Mrs. Tipton. How could she? What does she know about Mommy? Nothing. She was all wrong and I told her so. Good for you. So you don't think I was wrong to lose my temper? Rosamond struggled with herself. Because she said terrible stuff about the rest of us too. She said that I was sneaking sarcastic and that Patty's odd and that you follow Cagney around like a lovesick puppy and someday a man will let himself be caught and that'll be the end of your innocence. The end of my... This was worse than a slap. This was like having a pail of slimy, rotten garbage dumped over your head. Rosamond flung herself down and buried her face in the pillow. Sky was aghast. Was there no end to the damage she could do with her big mouth? Rosalind, I should have kept it to myself. No, you were right to tell me. But please go away now. I need to be alone. But go. You can't lie here forever, Rosalind told herself. Yes, I can, she answered back. I can lie here for as long as I want, which is until it's time to get into the car and drive back to Cameron. That way I never have to see anyone from Arundel ever again. Probably isn't just Mrs. Tifton who knows what a fool I've been. Churchy, creepy Dexter, Harry the Tomato Man, maybe even Cagney. Rosalind drifted restlessly on the bed. She had been lying there for 2 hours, doing nothing but listening to her thoughts go round and round. When Mr. Penderwick had come in to say good night, she had pretended to be asleep while he covered her with a blanket and turned out the light. She had never done that to him before. It seemed deceitful. Was that what being in love did to people? Was she in love? She had asked herself that many times in the last few weeks. Her mother said, You're in love when you feel like you've been hit by a truck. Rosalind felt bad enough for a motorcycle, maybe, but not a truck. And could you be in love with someone who didn't love you? And more important, someone you never kissed? Jeanne said no. Rosalind wasn't sure. She knew that you could kiss without being in love. She had certainly not been in love with Nate Cartwell when he kissed her at the Valentine's Day party, or with Tommy Giger when she pecked his cheek after losing the bet to Anna. But those had been passages from her childhood, she thought. Kissing Cagney would be very, very different. Kissing Cagney. Just thinking those words made Rosalind blush and feel confused and giddy. This is awful, she thought, turning into one of those girls at school who thinks only about boys. She sat up abruptly and tugged hard at her clothes. I need some fresh air, she thought, something to clear my brain. It was pleasantly wicked to be outside at midnight without anyone knowing where she was. Rosalind skipped through the still wet grass, her face raised to the moon. How glorious and mysterious was the moon, hanging forever in the heavens. What was Mrs. Tifton and her nasty little mind compared to the moon? Nothing. Rosalind twirled around as though she were again young and carefree. She wanted to see the Arundel Gardens one last time before she went back to hiding in her bedroom. She ran along the hedge, plunged through the tunnel, raced around the marble thunderbolt man, and came to a sudden halt, struck by the beauty of the place. The moonlight had turned the gardens into a fairyland, magnificent and mysterious. Fairyland. First twirling the fairyland, what was wrong with her? She turned to Jane. Rosalind sprinted off at top speed. She must need more exercise. By the time she got to the lily pond, she was out of breath. She flung herself down a large rock that stuck out into the water and rolled over to look again at the sky. A million stars were twinkling down at her. She wondered what it would be like to be looking at the stars with Tiny there beside her. What would they talk about? Constellations? Rosalind had learned the constellations in 4th grade, but could only remember Orion's belt. But maybe there would be no need for talk. Maybe they would hold hands and the fantasy vanished in a flash. Rosalind had heard something, and it wasn't one of the lily pond's frogs. It was a giggle. She turned over and looked at the giggler, and right away wished she had stayed in her room. Across the pond stood 2 people gazing into each other's eyes. They hadn't been there a minute before. Rosalind prayed that they would go away. But no, there they stayed, aware of nothing but each other. Then Rosalind prayed that the tall boy in the baseball cap wasn't who she knew he was. The girl, a teenager with long red hair, Rosalind had never seen before, and hoped never to see again. I'll be okay, but Rosalind, if only he doesn't kiss her. He kissed her. Now Rosalind felt like she had been hit by a truck. She needed to get out of there. Away, back to her bed and under the covers now, immediately. Without a sound, without breathing almost, she crept backward along the rock. 1 inch. Another? Oh no, she was too late. They had stopped kissing and were turning toward her. And here she was, pinned on top of this rock, shining in the moonlight like a giant white spider. She had to do something. If they saw her, her life was over. Maybe if she slithered down the side of the rock toward the water, she wouldn't be so obvious and they wouldn't see her. Slide, slither, slide, still unseen. Slither, slide, then... Oh no! Yelped Rosalind, losing her balance. She fell with a loud splash into the lily pond. Is she all right? This was a girl's voice that Rosalind had never heard before. She must have knocked her head pretty hard against the rock when she fell. You've got to try to keep her warm. Rosalind knew this voice. It belonged to a boy whose name she didn't want to remember right now. She felt him wrap something soft and dry around her. Only then did she realize that she was lying on the ground, that she was wet and cold, and her head hurt like crazy. Do you know who she is? Said the girl. Rosalind, the oldest of those Penderwicks sisters I told you about. Oh man, she's starting to shiver. She's kind of pretty, don't you think? I don't know, she's just a kid, said the boy. Look, do you mind staying here with her for a few minutes? I've got to get Mr. Penderwick. Rosalind stirred and groaned. She wanted to tell them not to bother her father. When she opened her mouth, she said, Too much of water hast thou, poor Ophelia. What the heck does that mean? Said the girl. I think she's delirious. Listen, can you hear me? Said Callie, for of course that's who the boy was. Why couldn't a passing stranger have pulled her out of the pond? She opened her eyes and commanded her brain to function properly. Don't bother Daddy, she said. You hit your head, said Callie. I'm okay, really, she said and tried to sit up. She saw that she was covered by a Red Sox sweatshirt. Callie gently pushed her back down. You shouldn't move yet. I want to go home, she said, and to her disgust started to cry. Then I'll carry you. No, I can walk. Rosalind protested, but Callie scooped her up, Red Sox sweatshirt and all, and cradled her in his arms. He peeked over his shoulder at the red-headed girl. She's beautiful, thought Rosalind, and felt like a bedraggled sack of potatoes. This is Kathleen, said Callie. Hi, said Rosalind. Sorry about your accident, said Kathleen. Accident? Rosalind's whole summer felt like an accident right now. Okay, Rosie, hang on, said Callie. Here we go. For many years afterward, Rosalind wouldn't be able to see a Red Sox sweatshirt without remembering that long trip back to the cottage. Kathleen chatted away about friends she and Callie had in common, who Rosalind had never met, and about a movie they'd seen together, a love story Rosalind had never heard of, and dates they'd been on before and dates they'd gone later. Callie threw in a comment here and there. But as for Rosalind, she didn't say anything, not one word the whole time. What could she say? That this was all unbearably humiliating, and that she hadn't known they would be at the lily pond, and that she had known it was the last place on earth she would have gone? No, she couldn't say any of those things. She knew now that constellations in Orion's belt were much too stupid to mention. So she closed her eyes and rested her head on Callie's shoulder. There was nowhere else to put it, and it did hurt so badly. And let the tears slide silently down her cheeks.